Welcome to yet another in the series of Perth US Asia Center Foreign Policy Conversations. This is actually today in lieu of what would normally be part of our Ambassadors Dialogue Roundtable series. One of the things that we've benefited from tremendously over the last 7.5 years of programming at the Perth US Asia Center is having Australia's representatives from abroad come back and share with us their insights, their experiences, and their priorities in terms of Australia's relationships with key countries throughout the Indo-Pacific. In the era of COVID, that's a little bit more difficult, but we're delighted to be able to share this conversation with you, our broader community here, with Ambassador Jeremy Bruer, the High Commissioner in Australia's mission to Bangladesh. Many of you, I think, will know Jeremy. He served as the Assistant Secretary of the Southeast Asia Maritime Branch. He was previously the Ambassador to the United Arab Emirates and High Commissioner to Vanuatu, among many other responsibilities. And Jeremy, thank you so much for making time to join us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Gordon. It's a pleasure to be here.
And thank you for helping us kind of focus ourselves more on Bangladesh, but also to share more about Bangladesh with our broader community. The community here in Western Australia in particular, but Australia more broadly and throughout the region, I would wager doesn't pay as much attention to Bangladesh as we should. It's a country, if I understand correctly, 8th largest country in the world by population, 165 million people, and one that's had a booming economy in recent years. I have to confess that over the course of a 30-odd year career working on North Korea, I often unfavorably used Bangladesh because North Korea, through most of my career, has dominated international headlines. And they dominated international headlines just because they were such a threat to the world. Missile programs, nuclear programs, illicit activities, human rights kind of issues. And I would often, make the quip that without that threat, North Korea was Bangladesh, when the reality is Bangladesh is so far more important. It has a population 8 times larger than that of North Korea, an economy 15 times larger than North Korea, and yet it hasn't been on the headlines. So this is our effort to try to rectify that a little bit, to pay more attention, and again, not just cricket and curry, but a better understanding of Bangladesh today. And who better to start that conversation with than Australia's High Commissioner? So could you just give us your sense, again, if you mind us starting at the beginning, kind of Bangladesh, why it matters, why we should pay more attention to it today?
Well, I mean, you're right. Bangladesh has been a kind of a quiet achiever, I suppose, particularly over the last 10 years or so. And it's one of those countries that kind of snuck up on us, I suppose, in many ways. It's certainly not caused anyone the sorts of trouble that North Korea has caused or the tension that North Korea has generated. But it's done its job. It's done its job looking after its people and trying to develop the economy of its country over the last 50 or so years in a way that is effective, but not very high profile, I suppose. And while I can't deny that Australia and Bangladesh do share a love of cricket, there's much more to the relationship than that. And I think it's fair to say that diplomatically things have been pretty strong since the earliest days of Bangladesh's existence as a nation. This year is a momentous one for Bangladesh. It's celebrating 50 years of independence. We joined them in March when they sort of had the biggest of those celebrations. And we're really proud that Australia was, I think, the 4th country in the world and certainly the first Western country to recognise Bangladesh in 1972. So that means next year is quite a big anniversary in the relationship too. It's a country which has concentrated very heavily on development, and they have managed to get to the brink of graduating from least developed country status, and that's a matter of great pride to this country and an important achievement for them. And of course, it'll change the way that they interact with the world in very many positive ways, as well as I think some challenging ways for it as well. But the economic growth that has occurred here over the last 10 years in particular has been quite dramatic and quite impressive. And it's been, I think, one of the fastest, if not the fastest growing countries, certainly in South Asia and probably in some of in the wider Asian region as well. And I think it's a country that I'd like to see Australians understand a little bit more about. I'm hopeful that you mentioned curry. I'm hopeful that the success of quichua in the recent edition of MasterChef Australia will at least make sort of more Australians think a bit about Bangladesh, and I hope that Bangladeshi Australians' contribution to Australia, we think there are something between 40 and 60,000 of them now in Australia, will be kind of recognised as well as part of, or as a product, if you like, of quichua's success. And I guess it's no coincidence that the current Vice-Chancellor of your university is in fact an Australian of Bangladeshi origin. And I think that says a lot about the potential that Bangladeshis have to contribute to the relationship with Australia. So I think it's a relationship that's long-standing. I think it's one that has great potential. And Bangladesh is, as you say, it's a significant country. It is always, we think of it as a small country sort of sitting right up there in the sort of corner of the Bay of Bengal, but it's a country of 160 million people. It's a big country. It's the 8th largest country in the world in population terms. And there's huge potential to expand and diversify our relationship, not just in trade, I think, but in other areas. The population here are young, they're full of energy, they're aspirational, there's a growing middle class, and Bangladesh is beginning to have an increasingly influential voice in our region. We share vital interests in the region, in the Indian Ocean in particular. Much of our international trade, both with Bangladesh but more widely, is conducted through, over and via the Indian Ocean, and our people travel back and forward over the Indian Ocean when they visit their families and their friends back home. We also want to be able to work with Bangladesh as we sort of manage the resources that are on and under the Indian Ocean and around it in a way that's sustainable and beneficial to our populations. And of course, Bangladesh is a country with an established international outlook. It's a major contributor to regional peacekeeping efforts, and we want both of our countries want our region to be prosperous and stable. The trade between our two countries, just to get back to that, which is kind of where we started, I think, is something that there's great potential to grow further. The amount of trade between our two countries has grown something like 550% in the 10 years, well, it's kind of the 10 years before COVID, really. So a lot of this stuff is before COVID, and COVID has provided an unwelcome interruption for so many things, trade not least. But we think that we still have great opportunities to expand on that, to diversify that, to make it a more intricate and complex and complete kind of a commercial trade and investment relationship. And we think that that 50-year anniversary is an opportunity to reflect on the ways in which we can offer each other things, we can learn from each other, and we can do things to meet the many challenges that our region faces. And we think that the potential for us to work together on all of those things is significant.
Indeed. Well, thank you. I've already made a note of not just this year's being the 50th anniversary of the establishment of Bangladesh, but next year being the 50th year anniversary of the establishment of our relationship. We'll have to make sure that we plan towards that. We who toil in the broader foreign policy world would love to think that national interest and trade and security would drive attention. But I think probably it is your reference to MasterChef that might get the most level of interest here. We do recognize that Professor Amit Chakma, our Vice Chancellor, as you mentioned, is originally from Bangladesh, although via Canada. And we're very happy to have someone from the Indo-Pacific and from the heart of the Indo-Pacific leading our efforts to kind of look at the region as a whole. You mentioned the negative impacts of COVID, and I'd like to get a sense for how things are playing in Bangladesh. We pay a lot of attention to what's happened in India. Today, we're all focused on Indonesia, but there's two elements that I hope you would address. Number one, obviously, is what's happening domestically in there. And then there's another neighboring country on the other side of Bangladesh, which is Myanmar, which has really garnered a lot of attention in Australia, and again, for not the right reasons. The military coup and crackdown, and then, of course, the refugees that are flowing not just from that, but from the longstanding disputes around the Rohingya. Obviously, those are things that you have a different perspective on, looking at it from Dakar. So could you kind of talk about COVID, and then COVID in the context of Bangladesh's neighbor to the east of Myanmar?
Well, COVID is having an impact here, and we've just hit, I think it's probably the third wave. The numbers have been spiking quite dramatically in the last week or so, and we're achieving close to new record numbers each day. It's a real challenge for this country because, as with all countries, we're seeing the way in which governments are trying to react to protect their people. But it's a complex challenge here because the level of population density, the sheer number of people, there's still quite prevalent existence of poverty in this country, mean that the kinds of opportunities in Australia that we might have, for example, to distance socially and to take the kinds of hygiene measures that might otherwise be available to us are not easily done in this country. So it's a challenge for them. And of course, people here are under great pressure to earn an income to feed themselves. So the impact of not working, of not interacting in person with people can be quite dramatic here in ways that are not in Australia. And the pressure on health services potentially is pretty significant too. And we're just seeing hospitals coming under a level of pressure here that hasn't quite been matched previously. So we're at a kind of a worrying point here. Everyone's been looking quite nervously over the border at what happened in India over the last couple of months and wondering whether or not it's going to replicate itself here. I think it's a little bit too early to make that judgment call yet, but it has meant that there have been lockdowns of one kind or another in place, and to varying degrees of stringency applied in this country for much of the last 18 months. It's affected certainly our development cooperation program here, and we've had a pretty strong and we think effective development cooperation relationship with Bangladesh over the years. It's, we think, helped to support. We wouldn't claim credit or even serious credit for it, but we claim credit for at least having done some things that have contributed to Bangladesh's development. And we've mentioned already the gains that it's made in that respect over recent years, including its impending graduation from LDC status. But we did do a lot of work last year to pivot our program, to change it to help to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. We've got something called our COVID-19 Development Response Plan for Bangladesh, and the focus in that has been on protecting the gains that had been made previously, as well as supporting Bangladesh's health security, its stability, and its economic recovery from COVID-19. And as well, in May this year, so just a couple of months ago, our Foreign Minister announced an additional $5 million of funding to go through the Bangladesh Red Crescent Society for the funding of essential supplies such as oxygen and related equipment. And that's on top of another almost $6 million in additional COVID-related funding that we provided last year. So, I mean, it has really had an impact on a whole range of things here, as it has in other countries, and the full extent of it has yet to be, I think, determined. Again, I think that's the same as it is in many countries too, and the resources of this country have been quite stretched lately in responding. But on the whole, the numbers that we've seen, the official numbers are not as I suppose, horrendous as we might have feared initially, but I think still people are apprehensive about what might be ahead. How that's affected the relationship with Myanmar is a difficult one, I think, to answer. Of course, we've seen the coup in Myanmar in the last 6 months, and Australia remains gravely concerned about the worsening situation there. We're deeply distressed by the growing death toll, and we condemn the use of lethal force against civilians. That situation has had worrying implications for regional security and stability, and it undermines our vision for an open and inclusive and resilient Indo-Pacific. And it's a matter of concern not just for Australia and our neighbours, but of course for Bangladesh as a very close neighbour of Myanmar, who's been, I think, watching what's been going on across the border with quite considerable attention. The Bangladeshi Foreign Minister has referred to the importance of upholding democratic processes in Myanmar and constitutional arrangements there, and he's highlighted the importance of peace and stability. And nobody wants a close neighbour with a long land border that is in turmoil. Of course, even before the coup in late 2017, Bangladesh faced an influx of hundreds of thousands of people from of Rohingya people, and that continues to have an impact here. I think currently they're hosting something like 1.1 million Rohingya, and it's having a real impact, particularly on the host communities around the Cox's Bazar district, and their safe and voluntary repatriation is a key priority for Bangladesh. There seem to be few indications that the root causes of that displacement have been addressed, and I suppose the recent unrest there in Myanmar complicates the situation further. The COVID pandemic has had an impact on our capacity to deliver services into the camps, and there have been restrictions on what can and can't be done in the camps in place because of COVID reasons for most of the last year or so, and they continue to apply. And of course, the fact that borders are closed because of COVID in various different parts of the world also has implications. So we will continue to work with Bangladesh to support Bangladesh as it works to support the Rohingya in Bangladesh. We remain committed to helping Bangladesh provide humanitarian support for the host communities in Cox's Bazar, as well as the Rohingya refugees ourselves. The budget papers, I think Australian budget papers, make pretty clear that we expect to invest about $80 million in towards that end in this new financial year. And a lot of that will be to meet emergency health and humanitarian needs there that have arisen not just because of the existing needs that people in that kind of position have, but also because of the added pressures arising from COVID. We're doing that through partnerships with UN agencies, through Australian NGOs, and through a local NGO called BRAC. And we're going to be focusing on basic needs in nutrition, education, protection, and what we call WASH, water sanitation and hygiene. So I don't know if I've quite answered your question there, but
no, you have, and the reason it's helpful is in our discourse here, and I'm sure you're familiar with this from your previous role. We tend to view Myanmar through the prism of ASEAN and Southeast Asia, and yet in terms of direct impact, it's probably having more direct impact on Bangladesh than any other countries in Southeast Asia, and that means your perspective there from right next door is really, really helpful. I also appreciate you elucidating on the continuing and very important Australian development assistance role, both pre and now during the course of COVID. However, I do want to turn to the broader question of trade, investment, economy, because my guess is that the average Australian paying attention to Bangladesh will be familiar with the history of development, and the prism through which we view Bangladesh will likely be a development assistance prism, when that's not the real story on the ground. The real story on the ground is what you started out with, right? Which is, the growth of the economy, the growth of trade and investment. So could you give us a sense for beyond development, what's happening economically, and then how that impacts the Australia, Bangladesh trade and economic relationship?
Sure. Well, I think I mentioned that trade between Australia and Bangladesh, that's bilateral trade, had up until the advent of COVID, grown by something like $550 550% in the preceding 10 years, and it had reached a level of about $2.5 billion by that time. That doesn't make Bangladesh one of our top trading partners, but it makes us one of the more important ones. And with the growth that was sort of potentially in there based on what had happened in the preceding 10 years, I think that it was heading in a direction that makes us an increasingly important trading partner for us. So we both have a real interest, I think, in broadening and deepening and widening our trade and investment relationship. We, I think, have complementary economies, and we think our strengths can help complement Bangladesh's economic growth more generally, but also its recovery from COVID-19. We, and I haven't mentioned, I don't think, this yet, we are currently hoping to be able to finalise a trade investment framework arrangement with Bangladesh fairly soon, a TIFA, we call it, TIFA. And under that TIFA, we hope that there will be a platform for us to discuss a much wider range of trade and investment issues and explore how governments can work together to boost recovery of the private sector and to help the private sector lead growth out of COVID in particular, but more generally anyway. You know, the kinds of things that we can discuss under the TIFA, we think should help make investment in both directions easier, should help broaden the range of things that we trade in, both on the services and commodities side. We still see opportunities in the garment sector, and of course that's been a source of much of the growth in this country over the last several years. Ready-made garments is a very important and critical sector for this country, and it's been affected quite dramatically, of course, through supply chain interruptions and that kind of thing in the wake of the COVID pandemic. But that remains an area of significant driver of growth. But agriculture, high quality food and beverages, education services, we think will remain important, and they have been important in terms of what we trade in with Bangladesh. We see further opportunities again to enhance trade and investment through bilateral cooperation in energy and minerals. As Bangladesh has grown, its demand for energy and power has increased. We expect that will continue to be the case. ICT services is another one as the economy evolves, and e-commerce and professional services too, as the sort of kind of thing that we engage on and broadens.
You mentioned the current negotiations on TIFA. I mean, sitting here in Perth, what we like to call Australia's Indian Ocean capital. You know, we're aware of the interaction we have through IORA, the Indian Ocean Rim Association. We're aware of the leadership role that Bangladesh plays in what is BIMSTEC, you know, the Bay of Bengal kind of initiatives in that kind of front. I'm actually not aware of Bangladesh's involvement in international economic architecture. So there was a lot of concern in the last couple of years when India made the decision to withdraw from its participation in the RCEP, the Regional Cooperative Economic Partnership. So beyond TIFA, is Bangladesh actively engaged in kind of regional economic fora or architecture?
Well, Bangladesh is very active in IORA, and you mentioned BIMSTEC as well. We see IORA as being an area where we want to work very closely with Bangladesh. We share quite a lot of interests in the region. I think I mentioned those to you, but they include economic and trade-related issues, but they're not restricted to those. We think there is scope for Bangladesh to do quite a lot in the region through its own sort of economic reach and its own economic growth through the large population that it has there. I have to say, I don't think that Bangladesh is an active player in WTO or anything like that, but I stand to be corrected on that. But we think that there is scope for improved We think there's scope for improved connectivity in the region. I attended a really interesting conference earlier in the year on regional connectivity, and the statement was made that 80 years ago, at the time of partition, independence from the British Commonwealth, the level of interaction and interconnectivity economically within this part of the world was much greater than it even is now, and that the kinds of bureaucratic and similar barriers that have been erected as a result are hindrances to intra-regional trade and to economic growth and prosperity for some places, some parts of the country and some parts of the neighbouring countries. So we think there's scope for that to be worked on. I think Bangladesh agrees with that and is keen to see more opportunities for interconnectivity with its neighbours, India in particular, obviously, but also Nepal and Bhutan, for example. And the kinds of efficiencies that would be driven by that would be, I think, pretty constructive and pretty helpful. I don't know if I've answered your question again there.
No, you're spot on in answering the question. I'm just thinking, as an institution, the Perth US Asia Center has done an awful lot of writing on trade, on connectivity, on supply chains, and it continues to do more. And I think what you've done is inspire us to kind of put a little bit deeper focus on Bangladesh's role in that. And so while they may not be a party to negotiations like the Regional Cooperative Economic Partnership or the higher bar still of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, when you look at things like the leader statement of the Quad that came out between India, Japan, the United States, and Australia, and the list of areas they're working on that, whether it's climate change or whether it's vaccines or whether it's cyber or whether it's supply chain security. My guess is Bangladesh, from everything you've said, is going to be an increasingly important partner, and we ought to start thinking proactively about encouraging a more active Bangladeshi role. That leads me to another area that we've discussed a lot, and that is infrastructure. The center has done a lot of looking at Southeast Asia in terms of infrastructure. The international media has focused a lot on South Asia in particular as an area of contestation for infrastructure. And obviously there have been some high profile cases in neighboring Sri Lanka there that have been seen as cautionary tales associated with the Belt and Road Initiative and others. Could you just tell us kind of about, in a densely populated country, I presume there are tremendous infrastructure needs. Can you tell us as to what is the game there? Is the game afoot? Is it contested? Is there resources being devoted to infrastructure? And what, if any role, do you think Australia might play in that process?
Well, it's certainly a country which is attracting a lot of infrastructure investment from a whole range of players, including from India, from Japan, and from China. And ADB and the World Bank and similar organisations are very active here with quite large portfolios. We're working with some of those multilateral financial institutions to improve transport and energy connectivity, which I think I mentioned in passing earlier. That's partially through our South Asia Regional Infrastructure Connectivity Program called SARIC. I don't know if anyone's ever discussed that with you before, but through that we're working with the World Bank and with IFC to help Bangladesh and other countries prepare a pipeline of transport and energy infrastructure projects in a country like this, which has developed so quickly. The infrastructure needs are palpable, I think, and the government is very conscious of that. The government here is very conscious of that and keen to see all the kinds of infrastructure that you would imagine in terms, power, transport, electricity, ports, those kinds of things are all very important to this country, and it wants to see them improved as a matter of policy. The program I mentioned, SARIC, it's also helping countries to develop infrastructure packages that can be made ready and presented as ready for financing, and that can help connect Australian businesses who are active in maybe renewable energy or low emissions technology to expand here into Bangladesh. So I think that Australia's role is more going to be one of catalysing and providing advice. We're not going to be a major infrastructure investor, at least not from the government sector, but we can certainly help them to work out a good program of planning and assessment of infrastructure needs and that kind of thing.
Well, it's our hope at the Perth US Asia Centre that short 30-minute conversations like these won't just answer questions, but perhaps more importantly, inspire questions and inspire interest. And for me personally, this conversation has certainly done that. Our hope is that those of our community who take the time to watch this will similarly be inspired to kind of look more closely at Bangladesh. And for that, we're deeply indebted to the High Commissioner Bruer, for taking his time. We also appreciate your service. We realize that as much as we might complain about our various up and down lockdowns here in Australia, we've got representatives out in countries like Bangladesh who are representing us well. We appreciate your efforts to keep the relationship strong during a difficult period of time. And we very much appreciate your taking time today to help us think through some of the issues that we should be paying closer attention to related to Bangladesh. So thank you, High Commissioner Bruer. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Gordon. And look, it's a privilege for any of us to serve our country. And the team that I have here are doing a fantastic job. My colleagues in the region and elsewhere and further afield are doing a fantastic job too, I think. And I think we can be very proud of them. And, you know, it's been frustrating not being able to get out and about as much as we would have liked. That applies to people across the world, I suppose. But I've really enjoyed my time here. I've met some fantastic people. I think that Bangladesh is a country that I really admire, the things that they've achieved, the way that they've been able to sort of pull themselves up from a very challenging beginning 50 years ago. And I'm sure some of us who are old enough remember the awful stories from that era is quite amazing. And it's kind of inspiring in a way too. So I hope that the kinds of potential that they've demonstrated in recent years is something that is recognised in Australia, and that we can bring ourselves more and more close to each other over the next few years. And I think there is going to be benefits for both countries from that. So thanks for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
Consider us inspired. And more importantly, we look forward to, although we can't quite see when that day will be, a day when you're able to return here for midterm consultations or otherwise. And we look forward to hosting you in person in Western Australia. Until then, we look forward to keeping in touch. Thank you.
Thanks, and watch this space.